Welcome to the Real Estate Pessimist Podcast. My name is Erik Stenbakken. With me, my co-host today, Kristi Kandel.
Hey guys, I'm Kristi Kandel here from Chicago right now.
Our background is in real estate investing. I specialize in vacation rentals. I've done long-term rentals and so on. And you tell us about your experience.
I have been a real estate developer for my career. I also invest in small multifamily, 1 to 4 units in Nevada, Ohio, and Florida.
So if you're watching the video, you'll see that her video is just a little bit chunky right now. It's because it's part business trip that she says she's on, but what else? I mean, you're actually kind of like a refugee at this moment here. So what the heck is going on? And what's the good news about this part that sounds like it would just all be bad?
I'm spending time in Chicago partially because I was here for work, but partially because there's a hurricane that was barreling down on my community in Southwest Florida. So we did get good news yesterday that we only got about 7 feet of surge into the property. So the reason that's good is 2 years ago we had Hurricane Ian come in. It was 9 feet of surge plus waves, which completely knocked out power and water for several months. And we're in a 7 to 15 year rebuild period. So the fact that we got a couple feet less means we have electrical panels, we have all the infrastructure in place. So as soon as utilities can be turned on, we can clean up the muck that's in the garages and move back home.
Okay, so that was another disaster narrowly averted. So for those who are listening, this has been a year of hurricanes. We've had a couple storms blow through, and pretty much everybody who owns homes and property in these areas is having a hard time. And that brings us to the title of our program here, The Real Estate Pessimist. It is easy on social media to have everything look amazing and great. But the fact is that we live in a world, and weather is one of the hazards that happen. But there are others. The reason we have this podcast is because too often, only the sunshiny things get talked about. The fact is that we live in this world, and when things get rough for us, we look around on social media and everybody else is only having pictures of their trip to Iceland and doing their happy dance when they got the rent check. And we think everybody else is killing it all the time. And we feel like, oh, I must be a failure. How come things are going badly?
And guys, that just isn't true. That's why we have this podcast, The Real Estate Pessimist. We talk about the good, the bad, and the truth about real estate investing, because we are going to have things like natural disasters happen. We will have other issues with tenants and evictions, and we're here to tell you those stories.
And it isn't that real estate is all bad. It isn't, or we wouldn't be in it. And we are. Kristi and I are in it full time. But there are hard days, and we want you to know that that is reality. There's an upside, but there's also a downside. Plenty of people are talking about the upside, not so much the downside. So speaking of that, tell me a little bit about a deal that you got into that you thought was going to be just a home run. What happened?
Well, it started in the spring of 2019, where I decided that I was going to start investing with one of my childhood friends in Ohio. I had my other partner that I had bought several properties with, and I convinced him. I said, hey, let's bring in my childhood friend. Let's buy this awesome fourplex in Columbus, Ohio. And everyone agreed. And so we started going through the process. We thought we picked the right neighborhood because in Columbus, there's certain suburbs that are a little bit more affluent than others, and they get the better class of tenants and rents. It fit our buy box of what we were looking for. A good price at $352,000 with the long-term rents around $800 to $900, which today they're upwards of $1,100 to $1,300. So it had healthy returns that hit our underwriting numbers. We knew there would be an appreciation play as well. And it looked like a very low-risk opportunity to be able to bring in a third partner. Seemed like all green flags.
So all the things are working. The typical things that you hear about, it's like in order to hit the 1% rule, you basically have to buy in a ghetto and collect the rent with a gun. And it's just like all the things that you hear the typical horror stories of. You didn't do that, right? So you've got a great location and the numbers work. You're hitting pretty close to the 1% rule with an upside to that to go even higher, which is rare. I know it's a 1% rule, but now it's the 1% exception. And so you're looking like you're going to do this. And what kind of risk assessment did you do before you bought this? Did you just like buy it, close your eyes, and like, hey, this one looks good? Or did you actually go through some steps to say, all right, let's make sure that this one's gonna work?
Every time we underwrite a property prior to buying, it's do we have multiple plans for operating it and multiple exit strategies? So typically with that, we went in and we created our operating agreement to be a long-term hold with 4 long-term tenants. Now we had a couple other properties already in Columbus, and we had accidentally turned some into Airbnbs. So we knew that there could be an additional upside if for some reason there was tenant turnover or an issue, that we could maybe make one of the units an Airbnb and make more rent than a long-term rental. So we underwrote it knowing that we could switch to that, but we also knew that it was long-term appreciation game as well. So on top of that, then what we'll do is I typically will walk a property with a contractor if they're available, or because I've been in real estate development and construction for so long, I can walk a property and see if there's any significant damage or structural issues to take a look at. So I flew back to Ohio on a trip because I had some other properties we were looking at potentially purchasing. And as part of that, toured the property with the listing agent and walked in every unit, saw the condition. 3 of the 4 were in good condition. The 4th was a little bit run down, but the long-term tenant there, we met with him, talked to him, and he wanted to be there a long time. He was fine with the current conditions. From that standpoint, it seemed relatively low risk. There was one unit, though, that while the tenant was paying rent, it was completely empty and not furnished. So,
Oh, interesting. But there was no dancing pole in the middle, right? It was
no,
just looked kind of normal.
no stripper
Okay.
poles, no anything weird. And so I was like, why is this unit not furnished? Does this person pay rent? So the listing agent says, no, we have proof. I said, send me proof that they're paying rent. And I looked through the unit, and in my head, I was thinking, well, if for some reason they stopped paying rent, the unit's in pretty decent condition. So we could probably very quickly, because there's almost nothing there, turn it into another long-term rental and have another tenant move in. So it seemed low risk. And the story we got from the listing agent was that this person was in construction. They were a superintendent. They got called off to go do a job, which again, I'm in construction. So I know that we have superintendents who will live on site at our job sites or very close by in hotels, or it all seemed to be making sense.
Okay. So you got into it, and did you close on it? And how'd that unfold after that?
Yeah, we ended up closing on the property. Everything worked out. We closed on the property. We started collecting rent checks, and the tenant who never moved in kept paying his rent. So we had a couple months where everything just looked good. Everything was running fine. It seemed like a great investment. And all of a sudden, I get a phone call from my Ohio partner, and he says that he got a call from law enforcement that morning telling him that Homeland Security had busted into the empty unit and that we needed to contact the sheriff's office to get more information.
That's not a call you want to get. I will say I have received a call from law enforcement with one of my long-term rentals, but not Homeland Security. So what did you find out?
Well, at the time, my youngest brother was helping me with property management. So I have my brother call the sheriff's office, and he starts to slowly get information. They weren't trying to give us anything because they weren't sure, as the owners of the property, were we potentially involved in what they just busted. So they were giving us very little information, and finally they did confirm they broke in, so we would have repairs to be made. So we asked them, well, what's the process?
So tell me, like, if a burglar breaks in, you get to charge the burglars, right? If they catch them and you find out who does it, it's like, oh, you're responsible for that. What happens when law enforcement breaks in?
Well, when law enforcement breaks in, they basically look at you and they say, you are a bad landlord and you did not properly vet your tenants, so you get to pay for all of the damage that we just caused to you.
That is an unexpected but true thing. I've heard of this here in Colorado. There was a situation where they had somebody holed up in the house and they all but tore the house. I mean, the complete house down. I mean, they threw in the bombs and the smoke stuff, and they ran vehicles into it, and they tore off a side of the house, all of which was the homeowner's responsibility, the landlord. So this is a real thing, folks. Don't think that Kristi's just saying like, oh yeah, law enforcement kicked in the door or broke a window or whatever, and then said that's not just an Ohio thing. That's a thing. Okay, so you hear this, like basically they have broken into your house legally, and it's your problem. What was the problem?
Well, to give us a little bit more background. So remember, this is a tenant we inherited. We did, when you inherit tenants and properties, we still will do our own unofficial background check. And unfortunately, this tenant had a very common name and you couldn't quite pinpoint who it was. We also have them sign our lease forms. So while you need to honor the current lease that's in place, we did have them sign our forms. So that was another check to be like, this is a human. They are alive. They exist. So there really wasn't anything more that we could do at the time other than maybe not buy the property. But of course,
Right, because yeah, just say that for those who are listening who might not know this. So if you buy a property, there's this assumption that real estate investors are these evil people. They'll buy a property, and as soon as they buy it, they evict everybody and they turn it into, I don't know, a restaurant, a club, an Airbnb. They triple the rents. Is that a thing? Can you really buy a property and just evict everybody the next day?
No, when you buy a property, you are honoring all of the agreements that are already in place. So that's why it's so important when you're underwriting a property. You're getting the existing tenant lease agreements. You're getting the prior rent rolls to make sure have they actually paid. You still have to honor those agreements. Yes, when they come to the end of their lease term, you could evict them, but you don't get to just come in right away and evict everyone.
So really, if you get to the end of a lease, it's not an eviction. It's just the end of a lease. It's if I'm renting a car on a lease term from the dealership and it gets to the end of my 3-year lease, they didn't come and steal the car from me. It is my obligation to return it. And so I just want to put that out there that both for those who feel that landlords are the evil ones, this leases survive purchase, right? The lease is between in a way, the property and the tenant. And if you buy the property, you're buying that lease and you're buying that tenant. And it all comes together that way. And so this is why doing your background work, which Kristi did on their leases and so on, and you can get rent rolls and so on like this, and you can make them sign a form. I believe it's called an estoppel, where it says like, yeah, this is their actual rent. And they're acknowledging all these things that they were currently, because you don't want to buy a property and then have the tenant say, well, I never saw a lease. I don't know anything about that. I didn't sign it. Somebody else signed that. And then you as the landlord are like, oh, great. I got somebody living in my house, but no lease. So that didn't happen to you. You've got leases. You've got people that are staying in place. Everything looks like it's going okay. Homeland Security breaks it. What in the world did Homeland Security find?
Well, they actually found quite a bit. Turns out, after more information came out and they realized we weren't part of this massive ring, they actually busted. Our house ended up being the stash house for a massive drug bust for a ring that was operating not only in Ohio, but in Kentucky and some other states. And basically, they found 80 pounds of heroin, and this 0 pounds of heroin were in our stash house apartment. So not only when I was evaluating the property prior to purchase was Homeland Security watching every move that we were making and vetting us to make sure there wasn't something weird happening in the transaction, but the cartel was watching us. So it's a little bit scary to be thinking that, how many bad eyes were on us and watching as we were purchasing the property. But of course, they didn't say a thing. So then at that point, now that we fully understand that, okay, wow, this is a huge issue. I'm now seeing the fact that we will be out of rent for several months. We'll need to make repairs. You put aside money for lost rent, for CapEx. You don't necessarily put aside money to repair Homeland Security busting into your property and finding 80 pounds of heroin. So now at this point, I've brought in a friend who I have known since kindergarten into a deal to help him become a real estate investor. And here I am sitting going, I am a complete failure. How the heck could I get this so wrong? Because it's one thing to lose my own money, but to potentially lose someone else's money or to get such a bad deal. So of course you start those spirals of such a failure. Like, what is happening?
Right. There's a lot of that going around right now, raising money, raising private money, raising, just all this stuff about I'll do awesome with your money. This is incredible. I'm going to, and a lot of that I want to say I want to believe that the majority of that is well intended. right? Is that they're not just people who are looking to partner with other people. They're not just looking to rip them off, but things happen. This is a thing that happened. That hasn't happened to me, but we'll get into that story when I heard my future renters. They were sitting down at a table with me and they said, "Tell us a little bit about the drug bust at your property." And I said, "Please tell me more. Law enforcement has never told me anything." So this stuff does happen. It doesn't make the headlines for real estate investing podcasts because it seems crazy. It seems like losing. But okay, but you didn't lose. All right. And we're going to get to that. So you're in this. How long had you owned the property and were other tenants paying? Basically, it sounds like almost everybody knew about this situation except for you. So how long had you had the property? What happened with the other tenants? I mean, just kind of give me an idea of what's going on the ground and from an investor's perspective.
Yeah, we owned the property for a couple months. And now that I'm remembering, we did have a tenant who was letting us know everyone was paying on time, including the stash house tenant. We did have a tenant let us know that there was a lot of weird comings and goings at weird parts of the night. And they didn't necessarily feel, they wanted us to check it out. They didn't feel completely unsafe, but they thought something weird was going on. So we were looking into actually putting up some hardwired Ring cameras. And before we could, that's when we got the call that Homeland Security came. So the tenants were noticing something. And that's where the more openly you can communicate and make sure that your tenants know that they can talk to you. And if they really think something's going on, to let you know. And that has actually
Good
happened
point.
on future properties. We really amped up our communication. And so we've gotten heads up now well in advance, and we've been able to head off other issues.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So what
so
was going on? What ended up happening with this? So the Homeland Security, they just kind of do their own thing. And then did you get involved in a lawsuit? Were you brought in? Did you have to testify in court? What did that look like?
since we weren't involved, they had watched us for the whole purchase. We only owned it for a few months. We weren't the landlord who signed up the tenant. We were not involved in any of the process of them taking down the cartel and that specific ring. So what we were left with is they said, "You're a bad landlord. You go fix your repairs." So we start looking into how much it's going to cost us to fix the different things. And at one point, we were just talking and we realized, wait, we have home insurance. Do you think it covers something like Homeland Security busting into your house? So we reached out to our agent and we're like, straight up, here's what happened. Not only do we have damages, but we have lost rent. Like, what does our insurance cover? Turns out, and this is where we got very lucky, and there's now questions I will ask on insurance policies prior to signing up because of all of the lessons learned. But we did end up, we had several contractors provide multiple pricing because the first number that insurance gave us to do the repairs was not enough. So we had multiple contractors put in bids. We showed them, here's the real numbers. And then we also were able to capture some of the lost rent from that unit. So all in all, from the costs that happened and the costs we ate, we ended up coming very close to breaking even. And that included a couple months of lost rent, figuring all of this out.
Okay, that's awesome. Let's just kind of rewind and go over some of this because investors should know this, is that it is possible that you have damage to a property. Let's just say it's $1,000. Let me not put a number on that. Let's say you have damage to your property and you don't know how much it's going to cost, right? So you call your insurance agent and the insurance sends out an adjuster and the adjuster looks at it, depending on your adjuster and insurance company. Maybe they say, I don't know, looks like $5,000 worth of damage. And then you should call some contractors, not just one and not just your cousin, but you call a few contractors and they come in and look at it and say, "Oh no, this is like a $9,000, maybe $10,000 job." Well, what do? Do you just have to give in? Do you like just suck it up and you have to just pay the difference? Kind of walk us through for just a second how you negotiated that with your insurance agent where their estimate and your real world estimate didn't match up and why that matters so much.
Yeah, when we got the numbers in, I knew what the actual costs were because I was trying to immediately start making repairs. And thankfully, this is where having partners that have different skill sets than you really comes into play. At this time, the partner that I had was really strong in insurance and legal and those aspects. And he's like, dude, no, we negotiate everything. This is just the starting number. And this is a thing for life, guys. Negotiate every aspect of life. Nothing is set in stone. Nothing is ever exactly as it's presented. And when it comes to insurance, the first number they give you is just the starting point.
Okay, so you can negotiate. This reminds me of my son. He would ask for when he's 3 years old or so. He'd say, "Can I have a cookie? Can I have a cookie? Can I have a cookie? Can I have a cookie?" Finally, I would say, "Okay, you can have a cookie." And he just didn't even wait a split second. If I said, "Yes, you can have a cookie," he comes back with, "Can I have two?" Because he's like, everything in life is negotiable. And it is really important to understand this, that with contractors, with insurance companies and so on, you can take steps. You can always ask. Now, people can say no, but you can always ask. And sometimes, in your case, this is awesome, you actually were able to negotiate to get costs covered. And what looked like this massive black hole for money ended up being almost a wash. Okay, so what do? You've got an ex-drug house here. You've got a 25% vacancy, and you've got a little bit of this history going on. Did you quit real estate, Kristi? What happened?
Yes, we quit real estate the next day.
No, it's tempting, though, isn't it? It is tempting in that time.
Sometimes it is so overwhelming when you're in the heat of the moment, but when you take the time to pause, you agree you're never going to make a decision when emotions are high, and you rationally go through it. So basically at that point, because we had realized our other property in Columbus that we had turned into a short-term rental was doing so well, like it was doing 2 to 3 times what long-term rents were on that property. And so we thought, well, why not, instead of, now at this point, we want eyes on every property. What better way to do that than turn that end unit into a short-term rental where we have a cleaner we trust and know and are talking to, coming multiple times a week to the property. We have a handyman, because you will have more repairs in a short-term rental. We have a handyman who lived 5 to 10 minutes away. So every little time there was something wrong in any of the units, we have extra eyes on the property. So we thought about it and we said, well, why don't we go ahead and spend a little bit more money, furnish the unit, and see what happens, because we should, in theory, make 1.5 to 3 times rent. Well, turns out that not only did we, that was a great decision. That unit consistently through the seasons will make 2 to 3 times what long-term rents are. The reason I like that model so much is because not only do we have eyes on it, but that allows us to not be landlords that constantly push every other long-term renter up to the peak market of what it could be. Now we still issue.
Wait. So wait a minute. You're not the horrible landlord that took away housing from everybody and turned it into short-term rentals, that somehow you actually made this work as a win for your other tenants. So talk about that just a second. And I want to clarify, when you talk about the extra rent that you're able to get as a short-term rental, a bunch of them, right? So I know that our gross rent sounds absolutely amazing. It's like, man, you make all that money, but what are some of the extra costs? You mentioned, you just kind of in passing, it's like, oh, well, we had to furnish the place. Like, yeah, when you do long-term renters, they bring in their stuff. When someone comes for a week to visit for a conference, they don't typically travel with a sofa and a TV and stuff like this. So you've got to buy that. What other kinds of expenses and so on are there? And the difference between your gross and net with short-term and long-term? Just take a minute. Tell me about that.
So we have a system down to where we will, between Amazon and Wayfair, that's how we will furnish the units. We want it to be nice. We want it to be clean, but we do not want to have expensive things in there, because sometimes expensive things walk away, even down to the cheap $100 or $200 Roku TVs. We will put them up, but they will not be anything fancy or expensive. So that furnishing cost is probably somewhere between $4,000 to $7,000. When we talk about the extra expenses, it's utilities. So now for that unit, you're paying all of the utilities: water, sewer, power, gas, internet. And internet's a big one, because you need people to be able to work when they're traveling. This unit in particular is a budget rental, so it's not one of our nicer luxury vacation rentals. So, and because we had just done the other property in Columbus, we knew what our numbers were, so we were able to get that one online pretty quick. I mean, those Zenus mattress frames on Amazon and those roll-up mattresses that come out and blow up. I cannot tell you, across every single property, I have had people comment and say, "Hey, where did you get these mattresses? They were so comfortable." It was Amazon. Even one lady in our Tahoe property had said, "My son loved your bed so much. Where did you get it?" Which thoroughly cracked me up. I'm like, Amazon, here you go. Here's the link.
Well, it's good that that they enjoy their bed. We've had renters enjoy our pillows to the point where our cleaner says, "So they left all their old pillows and took all of your pillows." So when Kristi says things can walk away, it's not always the things you expect. It's just people are funny. They're weird. Okay, so you get it. And expenses with a short-term rental are much higher. And I want to point out just a split second here is that gross, let's just suppose gross for a month instead of long-term is 800. Let's suppose you're grossing $2,000 a month.
Well, even
and people will say,
2,400.
Okay, so I'm going to make the number real easy so I can do the math easy. But okay, so you've got 20, let's go 2,400. Let's work with it. But out of that, the gross, and this is just a really quick aside, so people who are thinking about this and like, yeah, I want to do this, is that when you calculate gross in a short-term rental, that is everything. That is everything that you include, which is also your lodging tax, which is also your cleaning fees, which is also the platform fees, which is also, so all those extra fees and so on like that come in as part of your gross, which sounds amazing. And trust me, it looks great on social media. That's not your money, right? So you might be collecting $2,400 a month. That is not how much goes into your pocket as an owner. It's also a very, very high touch type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Although it sounds like your high touch kind of went up with your long-term renters also. That's awesome. I just wanted to say that it's important to know there are different categories of expenses that get added on when you turn something into a short-term rental that people don't always think about.
Yep.
You've got to redecorate with some regularity and so on. And that's more expensive. It's things you don't encounter with long-term renters.
Exactly. And if we can break that down a little bit. So let's say we gross 2,400 in that unit that could make $800 or $900 in long-term rent. We probably have $350 to $400 a month in utilities. Then depending, that unit has longer stays because of where it's at. So we'll have anywhere from 4 to 7 cleans a month. So let's call it that's another, it's $75 a clean. So maybe another couple hundred. So we probably will net out on that unit anywhere from 1,200 to 1,700, depending on how slow the month was or wasn't. So we're still clearing several hundred to more than what we could get from a long-term renter, while also having more eyes on the property, while also then having the ability to keep the long-term tenants without necessarily jacking the rents up every single time. And that's something we really want to do at each property. So like the tenant I said that was in the unit that was a little bit more run down and wants to stay there a long time. Well, we've remodeled the other units in between turns, so we don't raise his rent to the top of the market because he's been such a good tenant and he's been there so long and he's a great communicator. So it just gives us that extra flexibility to be human and to think about more than just the dollars and cents.
Awesome. Okay, so walk me through the mindset, right? Let's just take a moment and just talk about that, aside from the assets and the numbers and so on like this. So you're going in, and it looks like a good deal. You're bringing in a friend and it goes sideways, and you've got all these things going on. What were you thinking during this time? And how, if you thought negative thoughts, right? And you thought, oh, this is terrible, this is awful, which would be a normal thing, by the way. How did you get out of that and reframe this and think, wait a minute, we don't want to go down that road. How do you reframe so that what starts out looking like a loss, you can work through to end up with what it sounds like is a win at this point? What's your mindset process look like? I mean, is there other steps that you take? Is it just you're just a naturally optimistic person and all of this just came to you just naturally? You're just like, wow, don't worry, friends. This will be awesome. Just trust me. And they say, based on what, Kristi? What do you say?
You definitely feel like a failure at times, especially when you have the unknown, when you're not sure how it's going to work out, when you're not sure the exact next steps to take. I was thinking, oh man, I'm a failure. I now took on another partner. I'm losing their money. This is going to ripple back to our community that goes, oh, I invested with Kristi and she ruined it all. So of course you think all of these thoughts. Keep in mind, we have not lost the property. We are talking one unit in a fourplex. The other 3 are paying rent. I am the one beating myself up and I am the one who am giving myself the hardest time. Not one of my 2 other partners is putting this on me. I'm doing that. That's one thing where you have to learn over time to Not extreme ownership is something I'm all about, but at the same time, there are circumstances you don't have a crystal ball. You don't know. What you can do though, and what I've learned over the years is that you can take the time to pause. And when you take the time to pause, it allows you to respond rather than react to something that's happening. And then you're coming at it with a fresh mind, and you can start to think through the obstacles, the scenarios, the ways that you can go forward. And as you start to see that, once we figured out, here's the cost. Now we have hard facts. Here's insurance. Oh, okay. Let's present this in a great way. So we started negotiating with insurance. Then we start to get it prepared, and you just keep executing your strategy. And one by one, things start to fall into place. And then you honestly, by the end of it, it's all of these stories we'll share with you about these properties on this pod, but it's actually seeing me go through these really crappy situations that has gotten other people to want to invest with me because they see when bad things happen, I go figure out a solution. It actually also is how several people joined my other company, my development company, because they realized that, holy cow, Kristi will find a way to make this work out. We want to be on Team Kristi and be part of that momentum. It's, you definitely go full circle. You have all the thoughts, but if you're waiting to invest because you want to know every answer, you want to have it all perfectly mapped out, you'll never get started because you will never be able to see that forward. So it's just take the leap and understand that obstacles and problems are unavoidable. That you as a landlord are in a position to be the problem solver, and every area of your life, you're already solving problems in every area of your life, big and small, everything. Life happens. So just know that you don't have to have all the answers. You just need to put one foot in front of the other, and you'll eventually find a path forward that works.
Okay, I love that. Related to that, did you just naturally have all of this in you? In our company with our LLCs, we have a monthly meeting. And one of those things is, what are we going to do with this property now? Are we satisfied with what's happening? And we regularly assess these things and say, is there something better we could be doing? So are there specific steps that you do to outline and say, okay, here's our options? Do you ask for help from other people? Is it 100% DIY here in the real estate space? Are you really going cowboy, just solo on everything?
Not at all. So, along with having partners, as soon as this happened, I told all of my friends who are real estate investors what happened, and sharing that story and communicating. Other people had not necessarily 80 pounds of heroin and Homeland Security, but they had other similar types of situations happen. And they then were giving their how they responded to those issues that came up. So you have real estate networks and communities that are out there that you can talk to other people, and you'll quickly realize that you're not the only one that this happens to, and you'll hear how they solve the problem, and then that way you can craft your own solution forward. So, even if you buy it on your own and don't have a partner, you have real estate communities everywhere that you just need to reach out and talk to other people. They've gone through it. They'll share their stories.
Right. And that's an important thing that I want to emphasize is that things will happen. You should have some plans. You should be thinking about, hey, how could this go wrong? What are potential problems, and have ways to mitigate those. I appreciate that you've said, look, things will go sideways and you deal with it. This is one of the things that helps me understand why do this? Why take the risk? Because taking no action has risks
Mm-hmm.
also. Because guess what? The rest of your life is filled with risk. The rest of your life is filled with stress. And oftentimes, those problems and stress and risks have no upside. You can stay doing nothing. And if it goes badly, you have stress and risk. And if it goes well, you get nothing. And if you're taking calculated risks in real estate investing and it goes south and you struggle with a problem, okay, you deal with it. You have stress, you have risk, you have a problem, you have expenses. But if it goes well, there can be an amazing upside. You can take a risk on a thing and you can win. We're here to encourage you to look at those things, know that when things go bad, you can turn them around. Given time in real estate, time is a very forgiving element here. If you've got decent real estate, that you can usually right the ship. Anything in closing, Kristi, you want to share about your experience here and give hope to those who might be in the middle of a crisis?
The biggest thing that I've learned through every crisis or experience that happened is that you get so much more out of it than what's black and white. It's so much more than just the dollars that come. It brought me and my partners closer. It brought me and my real estate community closer because I was sharing something authentic that happened as opposed to just the shiny stories. And like I said, it brought other people into other companies and businesses that I was in because they saw how resilient I was through that. There's so many intangibles that come from that and how you can grow as a person, as a human, as a friend, as a partner. We invest in real estate because it's another way to potentially maybe get out of a W-2 or to create wealth in a way outside of the stock market. But there's so many more upsides because you're dealing with humans and you're dealing with places that we live, work, and play. So there's just so much upside there that you can make that positive impact that to me, it's always worth it.
Well, we're going to keep telling these stories, the good, bad, and the truth about real estate. And we hope you join us for more. And I'll tell you a little bit about Skyline and the question that my renters asked me about the drug bust that happened at my place.
I cannot wait.